Why don't we welcome in Byron Braggs into the conversation? I hope you're doing well, sir. Welcome back to T-Town.
Hey, thanks for having me. You would be talking about food just as I'm thinking about going to get something to eat.
Hey, always, man. I talk about food nonstop, man. I mean, it's just part of being a sports radio guy. All of us media guys, they feed us well, and we put on a lot of pounds. I'm always talking about food, man. Food's like football number one, food number two.
Hey, well, you got my attention. That's what I got my degree in, broadcast journalism.
Gotcha. All right, so let me get an update. What is Byron Braggs up to these days?
These days, he is a federal contractor. Because of my earlier job position with the federal government, there are age restrictions for federal agents. So when I turned 57, I had to go. But it made sense. I'm too old to be kicking indoors and throwing people down on the ground anymore.
How did football skills work into being a federal law enforcement there?
It was interesting. There was a program called Operation Pigskin where the former United States Customs Service was hiring ex-professional football players because at the time, when you see these guys that were used to working with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, ATF, you thought they were football players, and a lot of them were. And when you started getting into law enforcement and dealing with a certain genre of people, you wanted some beef going through the door, and that's how I found out about it, and I came in.
Gotcha. Well, that's kind of unique. I'm just curious as we look back at that 1978 team. When I say 1978 national championship team, what does that mean to you when you look back at your years here at Alabama?
The first thing that crosses my mind is, how people always talk about how Alabama has a cupcake schedule. And so take a look at that schedule for 1978 and think about 4 games that were non-conference. We played 2 Pac-8 schools, and we played 2 Big 8 schools. We played Missouri, we played Nebraska, we played Washington, and we played SC. To have a schedule like that now, based on the old parameters, doesn't even exist anymore.
So how did you guys survive?
I played at a fantastic time. We had a lot of talent. We had a lot of guys go pro from that team. I came in as a freshman in 77, so 77, 78, 79, and 80. That was a lot of star power on that team, and we played well. Had a couple of All-Americans, had a couple of guys go pro. Got guys in the Hall of Fame, be it the state of Alabama, or the NFL, or the College Football Hall of Fame. I was just there with a bunch of talented individuals, and of course, we had Coach Bryan. I really can't say anything about him that hadn't been already said.
When you look back, who recruited you to the University of Alabama?
Oh God, you're touching my heart now. Mal Moore recruited me, and I had a great relationship with Mal. Matter of fact, you don't know that much about recruiting. And you think this guy's recruiting you, and he puts all that time in to you, and now I set foot on campus. He's the offensive coordinator, and I got introduced to Ken Donahue. I'm going like, I don't even know who you are, and you too mean. And Coach Moore would tell me, he's like, why are you here? He said, you recruited me. He's like, I'm not your coach. Go down the hall. But Mal Moore, fantastic individual. I got to see him before he passed away, while he was still athletic director, and I told him, you've done some good work here. The man was the epitome of class. I just love the guy. That's the best way I can put it.
Well, I look back, and we talk a lot about Mal Moore here on our program. Steve Townsend's a friend of our program who wrote the book, Crimson Heart, Let Me Tell You My Story, and it is an awesome book of Mal Moore's, and you really identify, that book helps us that don't know Mal the way that you did. It helps us understand. I mean, he believed in Alabama when very few people did not believe. I mean, he went after Nick Saban, and there was people that was close friends of him, like Joe Namath, who said, you probably need a backup plan because I don't know if Nick's coming to Alabama. But he believed in Alabama when very few people did. and he targeted the best coach in college football, or pro football at the time, and he went after him by the name of Nick Saban.
Yeah. Alabama is a brand, and is a brand that a lot of people can't ignore, so much so that, people were going through Alabama withdrawal. They were looking forward to Alabama losing, but it's hard to argue with success. And Alabama as a brand is a very successful program. I would often tell the class that came in behind me at various different levels, or while I was there, after I had left, and I would come back and I would talk to some of the guys. I said, look, that brand is a book. Within that book, you represent a chapter. How do you want your chapter to be remembered? And I guess that's probably why you're calling me today, because my chapter, of the 4 chapters I have in the book, 78 is a nice chapter.
Was there something special about that team that, and I know all the teams are special. You look at the run and the dynasty that you guys were on. Is there something, when I look back at the chemistry of that 78 team, what was it unique about that maybe made that team so special?
Coach Bryan would often talk about oneness, beating with one heart. In other words, every individual on that team eventually was on the same page. Some got to it sooner than others, but at the end of the day, at the end of that week or that season, you knew that was one heartbeat. And once you have that, there is not a lot that is going to stop a team that has high expectations of themselves, that have a fantastic work ethic. Matter of fact, you don't mind the work. For Coach Bryan would often say, the rewards are high, but so is the price. Are you willing to pay the price? And we had individuals and that team collectively that paid the price.
Byron, this would probably make a lot more sense to you than what it would to someone that doesn't live in. I was on in Knoxville last night, and we were talking about Tennessee and Alabama, and we were talking about the rivalries. And he said, what's it been like in Tuscaloosa, Alabama for the last, 140 plus days? And I said, I feel like I'm hosting a funeral, because here in Tuscaloosa, it's like national championship or bust. That's what it was in the 70s. If you won a championship, a national title, it was ruled a success. If you didn't, it was like they came up a little bit short. You probably understand that more than most, because you were in a generation where it was national champ or bust right there in 77, 78, 79, and 80.
That is true. And when you get to that level, as one would say, once you get a taste, you want that taste in your mouth again. The SEC championship was very important, but at the end of that was a stepping stone to the very next task at hand, which was winning a national championship. You win that national championship, winning takes care of all ills. Granted, I was a graduate assistant during the time frame when Bill Curry was there, another class individual. But I'll never forget that homecoming we lost to Ole Miss, and next thing you know, there was a brick that came through his window. Winning heals all ills. If you don't win, next thing you know, those sores start showing up. As long as you're winning, and people that are willing to pay the price to win, it's like the ripple effect. That's why it's easy to recruit. That's why I'm up here in Virginia, and it's easy to get an Alabama broadcast, because the ratings, they play, they win, they generate good television. It's no different that they've already let the cat out of the bag, not the cat coming out of the bag, but the road show is going to be in place with ESPN for the Florida State-Alabama game, which makes sense from the standpoint of we know what drives this engine. They're not going to have Wake Forest versus Duke unless it's basketball. from a football standpoint, you wouldn't see that happen. And when you're winning produces a lot of good positive stuff. I would often tell people, like, I'm from Alabama, and when I was in high school, there were enough kids running around with Georgetown jerseys and jackets on, talking about Hoya paranoia. What in the world is Hoya paranoia? The Georgetown basketball team was reaping havoc at that time. So you can always find, I hate using the term fair weather fans, but if you're winning, people will gravitate to you. When Alabama wins, people gravitate to Alabama, other than the ones that are already entrenched and embedded, and there's nothing else. Even if they lose, they're gonna still have that yelling roll tide. But when you're winning, everybody likes being around that glowing diamond. So it's an attraction all about it. It's an attraction unto itself. It's no different like when you go into recruiting. Other than the fact that that kid wants to go to that school, what is that school doing lately? And are they winning? What can I do to be a part of a winning program?
Let me walk you back to that 1979 Sugar Bowl, which is very famously on our living rooms throughout many of our homes here in the great state of Alabama and outside the state. Daniel Moore.
It's in my basement.
Daniel Moore reminds us of that great moment. How would you define that moment when you look back at that goal line stand?
Tip of the hat goes to Don McNeil. I've watched the replays on YouTube, and Murray Leg got caught by a carpet spider and lost his footing. Don comes off of his guy and takes that wide receiver out of bounds on the 2-yard line. That set the table. After that, we just had to do our job and keep them out of the end zone. That's why they call it defense. We had to defend our end zone. So the tip of the hat goes to Don McNeil to have all of that start. And from that standpoint, Rich Wingo did his job. Curtis McGriff did his job. David Hammond did his job. Marty Lyons did his job. Murray did his job. EJ did his job. Wayne Hamilton did his job. And so on and so forth. It just kept going. And, of course, it ends with Barry, cover boy for Sports Illustrated, showing that well-defined back. Everybody did their job. And if you do your job and you're successful at doing your job, the outcome turns out the way you want.
I'm just curious, did you ever connect with Mike Gooman when you look back and look at that moment? Because what was so great for Alabama was so disappointing for Penn State. Did you ever have a chance to meet Mike Gooman?
No, never got a chance to meet him. But the individual who I used to talk to for a brief period of time was Booker Moore. Booker and I played in a couple of All-Star games together, and he came out of Penn State the same year I came out of Alabama. And we would often talk about that game and how it turned out, and the turn of events in that game. Who was that? Bruce Clark and what was the other linebacker's name? Was the GM for Detroit, and Matt Millen. Salt and pepper on that defense. That was an interesting team. Trying to think who else was on that team. Franco Harris' younger brother, Giuseppe. That was a classic bare knuckle fight. From an offensive standpoint, boring is all get out. But if you are a true student of the game, a game like that, you get an ulcer behind it. You have no fingernails left at the end of that game. It's just nerve-wracking. All it takes is one bounce of the ball, and everything changes.
Byron, I'm curious if you could help us talk about Jonathan Allen. I mean, we just watched a historic season here in Tuscaloosa from a defensive lineman perspective. You played the position. You understand it better than most. Help us understand Jonathan Allen.
I wish I could say I know him personally. I roughly live about maybe 3 miles from where he lives. But being that I'm a former player, went to Alabama, and the NCAA, you don't know who are sides these days. It's been so long since I've been to a high school game. I miss going to that. So I kind of kept my distance, and I watched, also from a distance. And the first thing that crossed my mind, how did Alabama get him down there? Two, he's a student of the game. He is, as I like to use the term, he is a craftsman. He practices his craft. The mere fact that he came back for his senior year bodes well for him on several different fronts. One, he took care of the education part. And part two, he wants to see if there's an opportunity to repeat. And they came close. I was watching this video from AL.com, and Coach Saban was saying if we had maybe called a couple of timeouts as time was running out, because they say it's a waste to take timeouts into the locker room after the game. And if they could have had a chance to catch their breath, because like you said, they were 1 second away. But in some cases, there's no defense for a pick play. But I digress. Getting back to John, he plays the run well. He's a great pass rusher from the standpoint you don't expect an interior rusher to push the pocket the way he does. His hand technique is phenomenal, because essentially when you get into interior line play, it is hand-to-hand combat. Really and truly, there's no difference between offense and defense. Who can use their hands better? From an offense standpoint, it's about hand placement. Because if you get your hands in the right place, they won't call holding. If they're in the wrong place, they're going to call holding. You have to be able to counteract that being on the defensive side of the ball. And to be a well-rounded defensive lineman, because the game has gotten so specialized, to find a person that can have all those tools in his toolbox, i.e. going back to the craftsman mentality, it's rare that you find that. The kid from I can't even call his name. The defensive end from Texas A&M.
Miles Garrett. Miles Garrett.
Yeah, he is not as fleet of foot as Tim Williams, but I'm sorry, he is going to be an edge guy. He cannot come inside. He comes inside, he's going to be dealing with some pain. Conversely, Mount Cody is not going to be outside. He is strictly inside. And as the game changed with the no huddle offense, you don't need your Codys anymore. That's where Jonathan Allen comes into play. That's where Reed comes into play. That's where Ashawn Robinson comes into play. You got big guys that can move. And as long as you can, this day and age, so long as you can move and be stopped at the same time, there will be a place for you.
Byron, I'm curious, and man, I could sit here and talk about it all day. I asked you for 15, I'm at 18, but I have 2 more questions. You got time for 2 more questions?
Yeah.
Okay, I love Alabama football history, and when we're sitting here on the edge of our seat listening to you talk Alabama football history, when you look at Coach Bryant, what is that one memory that you share of him that maybe sticks out above the rest? I know you said earlier that there's not going to be another story that you would tell that hasn't been heard, but everybody always has their personal twist. I'm just curious to hear yours.
Difficult question. So many memories go through my mind, but the one I believe that stands out the most is in Bryan Hall, I ran into an individual who played with Coach Bryant, and for the life of me, I hate that I can't remember his name. But it was one of those afternoons where he was just chewing the fat with me and was telling me about things that was going on at that particular time. So I'm absorbing all this information. And the athletic dorm was referred to as the BO house. And he said, ask Coach Bryant about the BO house. So the opportunity presented itself to me one day. I'm coming off of the practice field, and A lot of people didn't know this about Coach Bryant. He would be on that golf cart, but there are times he'd be walking around and palling with the guys, just talking to us. You kept your distance. He had his job to do, and we had ours to do. But at the same time, he was always there for us. He would always say, "My door's always open. Come on in." So I'm talking to him, and I said, like, "Coach, tell me something about the B.O. house." You thought it was Christmas. The man's eyes lit up, and he just came to a stop, and he just started running off at the mouth. And if you didn't know any better, it was like he had gone through a time warp. And we're talking like I'm a classmate of his, and he was just reminiscing. You remember this? You remember this? And going like, I just had to agree with it, just go with it. But he just went on and on. And from that point on, I think Coach Bryant he always kept a wary eye on me. It's like, if you know this, what else do you know? But I remember, because that led into after the Cotton Bowl, and Mrs. Bryant didn't make the trip to Dallas. Billy Varner told us, like, Coach sitting up there in the room, he ain't doing anything. So we went up there and we continued that conversation, and we just talked endlessly for hours. And that's something I will always take with me.
From your perspective, what is the biggest similarity that you see between Coach Bryant and Coach Saban?
I would say I go back to using that word craftsman. Coach Bryant would often say, surround yourself with good people. Your job will become that much easier. And in the game of football, you have to work with people that you have a trust for, an understanding, how far you can go with that individual, because that individual also has to grow. Paying attention to detail, paying attention to, Coach Brown would often refer to the little things. Coach Saban is a carbon copy. If I could give you three names, and I would place 6 degrees of separation between the three: Coach Bryant, Coach Stallings, Coach Saban.
Wow.
When Coach Bryant retired, the first name that popped into my mind was Coach Stallings. Simply because, forget the junction boy aspect of it, close your eyes and listen to these men talk. That draw, the pauses, you would think you were talking to clones. All right. Coach Stallings, Coach Saban. Control of every facet of what takes place in his discipline. Coach Saban, backtrack to Coach Bryant, complete control of what takes place within that discipline. There was nothing that took place on that football team that these coaches did not have an innate feel for, whether it was them directly or through their assistants or that insurmountable entity known as that gut feeling. The way that Coach Saban operates that football department, like I say, it's a well-oiled machine. I can say the same thing. I was not there for Coach Stallings, but I was there for Coach Brown. Well-oiled machine. All the parts came together at the right time, and they worked flawlessly. The thing that stands out about Coach Bryant, he did it in 2 different decades. You're talking about 2 different systems, and he was successful both instances. So you're going from a drop back pass, split back, to now all of a sudden you're running the wishbone, and you're holding everybody at the task. It's nothing more simple than a triple option. And it's the most difficult thing to play against because you can't mimic that in practice. That's why certain teams do well. You better have great athletes to even make it a ball game. But those three individuals that I just named, think about those things that the carryover between. You think about what all great coaches have in common. Those are the things they have in common.